Welcome everyone. Today we have amazing survivor Lisa Meister joining us. How are you, Lisa?
Great. Thank you for having me, Gabby.
Oh, you are so welcome. I've been so looking forward to catching up with Lisa and sharing some of Lisa's story and her incredible work. She's been doing so much. She's been speaking out publicly, in particular to the church, which I just thought was brilliant to get that knowledge of satanic ritual abuse into the church community as well. Lisa's written books and she actually runs her own podcast now, interviewing survivors and just really covering a lot of healing topics, sharing her experience on, having the memories come back and, healing through prayer and healing through so many modalities. And it's just so beautiful seeing survivors all over the world, using their voices. And it's kind of working in two ways. It's educating the public, that have no idea that this actually exists as an evil underbelly in our society. And then because we have so many new survivors waking up at the moment, it's just incredible having survivors like yourself, Lisa, that are so far along in the healing journey, and you're now speaking out, you're, writing books and, creating this healing for other survivors that are just waking up as well. So I would love you to share, a little bit about your story for people that haven't met you before, and how your memories started coming through, and I guess how you woke up to this hidden part of your childhood.
I was born in 1969, and I thought that I grew up in a Christian family. We looked good to the outside world. I was not allowed to leave the house unless I was perfectly coiffed. And you were prepped on how you would act, what you would do every time you left the house, every time you got out of the car, because you had to look good. So kind of the way I have explained it is, God knit me together in my mother's womb, and I was just me in her womb, and I was fine. And then I was born, and all of a sudden I wasn't fine because I was never good enough. So my parents were constantly at me to do better, be better. I had to perform for them, and I did. And every time I would do whatever it was that they were telling me to do, it was never good enough. So I spent my life overachieving in every area and trying to be the perfect child. And I was a very good child, and uh, kind of meandered through my life. I was valedictorian, and I was told that I was a big fish in a small pond. I played softball and I became all conference shortstop, which was a big honor. And I was told if I was in a real school, I wouldn't have made the team, stuff like that. It's like whatever it was, it just
Yeah,
wasn't good enough. Graduated with distinction from college, was told if I was just an elementary school teacher, so I'd wasted my education, that sort of thing. So wasn't a good family, but okay, we're Christians, so we're okay. And got married after college to a wonderful man, Patrick, and started having kids. And by the time I was 29, had fallen apart, was pretty unfunctional, and didn't know why. My emotions had shut down, couldn't feel anything. We had built our dream house, had 3 kids. I was starting to homeschool. And it's like, I'm not feeling anything at all, just not feeling anything. And I couldn't understand why. And then we had my parents over for dinner, and they lived a couple hours away, so it didn't happen real often. And things had been just really tense. They didn't want me to get married. They didn't like my husband. Never knew why. Didn't make, nothing made sense. My whole life didn't make sense. Nothing ever did. And so nothing out and out happened. But my dad had built this tent, and he would let my 5-year-old in, but not my 3-year-old son. So we'd keep him out, and he was crying. He's like, no, he's just going to break the tent. Made no sense. And then at dinner, we had cake, and my husband told my daughter, you have to eat the cake, not just the icing. And my dad took a huge scoop of just icing and put it in my daughter's mouth while I glared at my dad, challenging his authority. And that's all that happened. And he left, and I put my kids to bed, and I was just very upset, just scouring the floor because I take my upsetness out on my linoleum. So just
Love it.
get a clean house that way, right?
Yeah.
My husband comes out and he sits at the bar stool and he's watching me, and he's so funny. It's like, so what's going on? And I'm like, he's buddying up to her. He's buddying up to her. You can't let him. Who's buddying up to, who, and it's like, Dad, he's buddying up to Jessica. And he's like, okay, what would he do to her? It's like, I don't know. I don't know, but you can't don't let him. It's like if he's there, I would have been shaking him. You can't, like this desperation. And it's like something is there, something is rising up, but it's like I just can't grab it. It's just somewhere. And I have to know it because my daughter's in danger. I knew she was in danger, but I didn't know what it was. I knew it was him, but I didn't know. And it was terrifying me. And I went to bed that night, and it started 2 weeks of nightmares. And it was getting raped by groups of men just every night at the same. It's just awful. And after 2 weeks of this, I had my first flashback. So we were getting ready for bed, still awake, wasn't even thinking about it. And just all of a sudden I had this man's part on my face, and I'm slapping my face, screaming, crying, trying to get the feeling off. Didn't know what was going on. My husband, there's your wife screaming and slapping her face.
Wow.
It's like, yeah, she's really losing it now. So, like he pulled me on his lap and calmed me down, trying to find out, what's going on. And he figured it out before I did.
Wow.
It's like, Lisa, I think you're having a flashback. I'm like, but how, to me, it was like, I would have known. Like, I didn't know about repression. I didn't know about dissociation. I didn't know about any of that stuff. Like, how would you not know? It just didn't make sense. And it was the first time information just popped in my head. It had never happened before. And I said I would, and in the flashback, I didn't see a face. But I said that everything inside of me says it's my dad, and my mom knows. It's like I would never accuse him of it. If I don't see a face, I can't accuse anybody of anything. And the funny thing was, as I would think about my dad, I couldn't remember what he looked like.
Wow.
I could not come up with what he looked like at all, like nothing. It was just completely blank. And so that started 9 months of sexual abuse in the home, flashbacks. And it was just excruciating. I just couldn't believe it. It just took a while to just take it in, and things started making more sense when I started looking back over my life. Like, I always had what they called yeast infections growing up. They stopped when I got married. That makes no sense. I remember telling my mom when I was very little that Dad hurts me, and she goes, oh, he just wrestles with you. And, and it's like, no. And I pointed down, he hurts me down here. And she goes, oh, he's just checking you for vaginal infections, and I think that was the last time that I had tried to tell her, and then I just, after a while, when no one's going to listen, you just quit. And I'd always remembered that clip. I'd always remembered telling her that Dad's hurting me down here, and her saying he's checking you for vaginal infections, which is weird that never disappeared. So there was a lot of weird things that I remembered, and I had kind of put those aside. And then during those 9 months, I wasn't getting better. I was getting worse, which made no sense because it seems like once you start accepting it and understanding it, you should get better, right? And I was, and I wasn't. So I told my husband, I was like, I think I'm going crazy and I'm not fighting it anymore. And that bothers me. So we found a Christian outpatient clinic. So I went there for 2 weeks, and this really good psychiatrist was there. And so I was running this by him, and he said, people that are going crazy do not know that they're going crazy. So you can take that off the table right now. So that was very helpful. That was like the piece that I needed for those 2 weeks. So that was good. And then at the end of 9 months, then ritual flashbacks. All of a sudden it was people in robes, graves, and fire and knives and blood, and just the terrifying stuff started coming up. And I'm like, what is this? Now I'm really going crazy. Now just throw me into a padded cell. That's what we're going to do. So it's like, we got to go back and talk to this psychiatrist again so he can convince, he can tell Patrick that I'm crazy, because this makes no sense. So we went back to him, ran by what I was seeing. And he said, yeah, he knew that I had been satanic ritually abused. I'm like,
it was news to you. Yeah.
How would you know that? And he said, because the extremity of the abuse of what your father did to you inside the home was in the top 90 something percentile of severity. And that only comes along with satanic ritual abuse. And it's like, oh. So we then went back to the town where I grew up, which was 8 hours away, because I felt like I needed to validate it for myself. It was still just like, I just wanted to throw it out, because you don't want to be a survivor. You don't want to be a satanic ritual abuse survivor. And so in some ways it's like, I got to prove it to myself, because I really don't want it to be true. And so you just fight it. And so we went and found, and I'd always known my parents had been part of a new age group, and that's all they said. It was part of a new age group, and they would sit and meditate. And my dad had told my husband once, yeah, we levitated a table once. That's, about all we did. Like that was no big deal, just a little bit of magic,
Yeah.
Anybody could do that, it's not a big deal. So yeah. We went up and we connected with the witch of the group, with her daughter, and heard some stuff enough from her to validate some things, and ended up finding her ex-husband. So we went to talk to him. And when I said who I was, he immediately looked at my husband like he was going to come beat him up.
Wow.
Whoa. So, and then he was just denial. Like, this was a small town, like 2 traffic light town. And he had no idea who my family was. My family had a pharmacy that he was a customer of. He's like, I don't know where that pharmacy, and his current wife, who was also a customer of my dad's pharmacy, because I used to work there, I knew her. He's like, sure, I don't know it. And she brought a bookmark in the book he was using right now, well-used bookmark with my dad's pharmacy logo right on it, and put it right in front of him. It's like, I don't know any, it's like, it was enough for me to validate, so went through all that. And then it was, I have validated it enough for me. Now I have to heal. I'm done fighting it. So now I have to accept it and put my energy into that. And so that was a big shift, a big change. And I don't know how long that took, maybe, I don't know, several months of fighting it and validating and seeing the psychiatrist and all that. And, I think with SRA, there's just enough devastation that's left that you can find those pieces. That's,
For sure. And
so
it really is with, discovering that you have these memories, like that whole process that you were speaking about then, Lisa, for survivors, it's you kind of putting together the pieces, like, because they're coming randomly. You don't know what's next. I mean, I had my first memory 9 months ago and was absolutely shocked, even though I knew I was from a dysfunctional family. there was addiction, there was mental illness. So it was an absolute mess. Like, you know, I think I thought up till then I'd done really well to become the human that I am today. And then to get these memories and go back even further and be like, wow, there is another whole layer of evil that was in my life. And, you know, I'm in my 40s now. I had no idea that that was actually buried there. And, you know, the thing that I hear from survivors the most is, you know, we're not taught what ritual abuse is. That's not anything we remember. It's not the world we live in now. So it's a big jump to go from, you know, knowing you were abused in a family, even if it was horrific, to finding out, you know, what is ritual abuse. That happened to me. You know, we're not told when we're abused, you're being satanic ritually abused. It's just when those pieces start coming back and you've got those themes, it's like there's nothing else it can be. So it really is like you were explaining, it's you go through this whole stage of denial, really, because you're just like, it can't be. It just can't be. So yeah, I can definitely feel for,
I don't want it to be.
yeah, you don't want it to be. You're just like anything but that.
If I concentrate hard enough.
Put it back in the box.
Or I even, you know, I prayed even recently. It's like, you know, God, I really don't want this testimony. Can we switch it out? You know, I'm just really had it with this. And he's like, Lisa, you're kind of stuck with what happened. Yeah, I know. That's good.
It's in the past.
But, you know, I know some survivors that don't talk about the SRA part.
Same.
To say, I just call it sex trafficking, and I just don't even address the SRA at all. I mean, there's a lot of people that I've known that are SRA, and it's like, would you come on my show and talk about it? And they're like, oh no, I never talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, okay, God, I could do that. I just won't talk about it. That would be so much easier, you know. But if we don't, and I'm not saying the people that do that are wrong at all.
No.
I would very happily step into that if God would let me do that. But we need to address it and talk about it. So number one, that we can help other survivors to pull out and to heal. Two, that we can educate the churches especially, but also, you know, psychiatrists, psychologists, police, doctors. You know, we need the world to understand this. The Balenciaga stuff shows you, you know, Hollywood, all the industries, that the world needs to understand that this is real and that we need to fight it. But most importantly, because of all the kids that are in it right now, and if we don't take it straight on, we will never get those kids out. And that's our biggest problem.
Absolutely. Knowing that it's still happening today. So not just for survivors healing, but knowing that these rituals are still going on today. You know, that's a real fire in my belly to get out and speak about this. You know, as uncomfortable it is for other people to hear it, it needs to be said, because these children without us, they don't have a voice. And, you know, the systems are so infiltrated, like you were saying, Lisa, and, you know, they're set up to deny that it's believable. To, like, you know, in psychology, you learn that it's false memory syndrome, for example. So, you know, unless a therapist has done their work and maybe come across survivors and looked into things other than their indoctrination by Tavistock universities, they're not going to believe this is real. I mean, for an example, yesterday I went to a beautiful healer to have some work, energetic work done on me. She was asking me about things that were coming up that were going right back into like 1-year-old, 4 years old. And I'm going to have to give her a call today and make sure she's okay, because she had no idea. She's like, I've heard about this and I thought it was a conspiracy theory. And, you know, that's a reality. Like, until even healers or, you know, people in the community come across this hands-on, they don't believe it's true. And like, even like you're saying, for survivors, you know, there's that denial that they've experienced it was something else, you know, and that's a bit of like, I guess, sometimes a Stockholm syndrome. They're not wanting to put onto their family members or, you know, relatives that they are Satanists. But that's also, you know, that's part of the programming that we experience as well, is, you know, don't speak about this, it's not true, be silent, you know, you don't talk about your abuse. And that's all in survivors and needs to be broken down as well. And it's why these conversations are so important, because I know for me, waking up now in, you know, the 2020s, it was so much easier to get through this denial stage quicker because these conversations are happening. You know, I really feel for survivors like yourself, Lisa, that woke up decades ago, like there just would have been so little support. You know, there wasn't the internet that you could go like look these things up on. Not that they probably would have even been there if it was the case. There weren't books. You go to a therapist, a psychologist, and they'd just be like, you lost it. So, you know, that's such a big wall for people to go through. And I'd love for you to you know, say a few words, Lisa, on, because you're speaking to so many survivors, you know, talking about ritual abuse. How would you define ritual abuse, and, you know, what sort of patterns do you see coming up in survivors? So for people that are listening, you know, they can look back into their own lives, you know, and think about that sort of thing, but also it helps us identify, you know, potentially people or even children in our communities that are still going through this today.
Satanic ritual abuse is an extremely sadistic physical, sexual, emotional, and spiritual abuse on children and vulnerable adults. It is vulnerable adults also, so it's kind of interesting. And it is in the worship of Satan. But to worship Satan, they do it by blaspheming God through mocking the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, if you worship God, you say, oh God, I love you, you're wonderful, you're holy, and you focus on him. If you worship Satan, you do it by mocking God. And he has it done by going against those who are innocent. And that's why he likes to go against children and babies. And ultimately, Jesus was the most innocent person there ever was because there was no sin on him. Now, babies are born with a sin nature. Jesus had no sin nature in him. So ultimately, when he died on the cross, he was the ultimate of sin free. Now, a baby has not chosen any sin. And so when you look back in the Old Testament and they talk about passing children through the fire, that was also satanic ritual abuse.
Wow.
And they would throw children into the fire and they would sexually abuse them in the same ways that they do now. So in satanic ritual abuse, some children are killed, and then some children are considered a living sacrifice. So it depends on, they cannot have too many bodies. They can't have too many children that go missing. So statistically in America, we have about 800,000 kids go missing every year. The majority of them come out of the foster care system. And we're having a big problem right now in that our government is flooding the foster care system and taking kids away from safe families, and they're taking them away from safe parents. I mean, it's just a mess right now, and these kids go missing and nobody looks for them because they're in the foster care system. So we also have within a satanic cult that when the girls that are the living sacrifice get old enough to start having periods, they become breeders. So they will ritually impregnate these girls, and they won't let them get full term, but they will get them to the point where the baby will come out looking like a baby, very small, but fully formed. And then those are the babies that will get killed because there won't be a birth certificate and nobody's going to be looking for these children. So they will have children that they can kill. And, you know, it's graphic, it's horrible, but it's way horrible for the kids that are seeing it, experiencing it for themselves. So they do this because they get satanic power for doing it. The satanic realm is real, and they really do get power in these rituals. So if you have a living sacrifice, which is what we were, they would do rituals, which were horrible. And after the ritual's done, then you would get sex trafficked. So people would come and everybody would rape them. And everybody that rapes somebody who is just the target of a ritual, they get power, satanic power through that child. And that's why they are doing it, because they really do get power from it. And it works, and that's why they do it. It's done at a small community level, which is where my parents were a part of. It's done at state level. It's done at government levels. It's done around the world. You know, as well as I know, we both talk to survivors all around the world. My podcast is listened to in over 70 countries because it happens to people all over the world, because it works. And if you look in the Bible, you will find out the whole entire Old Testament keeps coming back to it. If you talk about Molech, Baal, Tophet, and Asherah, they all start going back into child sacrifice, sexual orgies, and it all goes together. And you go into the Valley of the Son of Hinnom, which is a place right outside of Jerusalem, where even the evil kings of Israel would go and sacrifice. So they would go into the temple and worship God, and then they would go to the Valley of the Son of Hinnom and worship Tophet and Molech. I mean, it's horrible, absolutely horrible. So God even sent Jeremiah in Jeremiah 17 into the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. And God said, I now declare this the Valley of the Son of Slaughter, because God sees every time this happens and he calls it out. And that is why Israel got sent to Babylon, because Israel kept returning to satanic ritual abuse. And then we shoot to Jesus dying on the cross, which is the ultimate in satanic ritual abuse, right? Because that's actual. Jesus stepped into it. Jesus stepped into the ultimate ritual. He laid his life down to step into the satanic realm to break all of this curse, to break it all. And some people think, oh, that doesn't go on today. Well, it still goes on today because they get the power from it. So it has never stopped. People aren't going to stop what they get power from. They get money from, they get positions from. My parents retired when they were 50 years old. They shouldn't have had that much money. There's no way they could have had that much money.
They're taken care of, aren't they?
Yeah. They got positions they shouldn't have gotten. They got loans they shouldn't have gotten. You know, things get taken care of in the group. They take care of each other. And you know, if you watch the Balenciaga, that's at the elite level, and you can see all the inner workings of how they get each other, all the things that they need to do. They've got the money, they've got the connections, and it works even at the high level, works at the low levels. It all works because they will seek power. And that's what the pastor, when I was 7 to 14, we got to a Christian church, and the pastor was trying to minister to my dad, and my dad said to him, I know the devil has power. Prove to me that God has more power. And that's a problem, because he didn't want the love of God. He didn't want the forgiveness of Jesus. All he wanted was power. And I think that's why God doesn't just give us all this power, that we have to spend our life growing in relationship with God. You know, he will do miracles through us, you know, that we will see healings and you will walk in what he wants you to walk in, but it takes going after him, because he knows that power corrupts.
Yeah.
Power always corrupts. And we got to make sure that we stay focused on relationship with God, going after the love of God, because that's what's important. Power doesn't matter. Power is just stupid. Money is stupid. It corrupts like so bad. We need it, Don't get me wrong, we need it, but if it's going to corrupt you, don't take it.
And when we look
My
at,
parents made bad choices.
yeah, and we look at that whole inverted, power structure that runs across the world, through our politics, through entertainment, through, like you said, federal, state, your local town, your local church and town hall. It's just such an inverted structure that is all about power. It's all, the money, the power, and the control. And when we allow God to work through us, it's really breaking down that completely. So it makes sense, that power isn't what we want, and it's not what's offered to us immediately. Power in terms of the sense of power in the world around us, but it becomes about, that finding that power and that sovereignty and that empowerment from within, that courage to do what is right, regardless of how hard that is. And that's something that these people just don't have whatsoever. And like you were saying with your parents, they were taken care of so much, there was no reason for them to seek forgiveness or seek God. They'd found who they want to worship in this plane, and it works for them. And it's just so unfortunate that this is such a massive underbelly of society or culture all over the world.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, you see what drives them. It's, it's not of God. And that's what you start listening for some of those words that they start giving, the power. They want position. Even in a church, they want power in the church. They want position in the church. They, like my dad, liked to go in a church and drop a ton of money in a very showy way.
Wow.
He liked to insert himself. He would go and like start out at a church. Oh, I would love to mow your lawn for you. Oh, let me take care of the shrubs for you. And then the next thing you know, he's on the board. It's like insane. Absolutely insane. And then you were talking about what to look for in survivors, that ability to dissociate. So you're with somebody and then all of a sudden they're gone. That they just zone out.
Nice.
Yep, they're just gone. Or somebody that it's almost like they're a different person all the time. They'll just switch and it's almost like a different personality. And you never know who you're going to get. That's another thing to be looking out for. With kids, they tend to be very quiet about the abuse once they get to a certain age, because they know that their life's on the line if they tell. There's don't tell rituals. There's a lot of silence programming into them. They know that they can't tell. I remember once I was going to tell a basketball coach. Wow. And I went to tell her and it's like there was nothing there.
Wow.
And I knew I was going to tell her something and it was really important that I told her. And when I went to tell her, there was just nothing. And it was just this moment of, and I still can't explain why, but I think some programming took over, and just wiped it real fast. So they're not going to tell you, but they will have tics that come out. Like I had this incessant blinking I couldn't stop. I would stare at the ground and I wouldn't look anybody in the eyes ever. It's just, turtling, making yourself very small. My husband said when I got to college and met him that my self-esteem was a little lower, or no, a little bit higher than a street person, which made no sense. Valedictorian, I was
so successful.
Yeah, I was very successful. I was smart. Things in my life just weren't matching. And so look at that, is what you're seeing matching to what you should be seeing in the child? A lot of the artwork is interesting and what they're writing about. A lot of breakthrough will come through that. I used to draw stars in circles all the time. I was always doodling. I just always did that. And when I was an adult talking to somebody, I was drawing it, just doodling on the phone. And I looked down and I realized they were all pentagrams. And nobody ever said, why do you draw pentagrams on everything you do? You would think a teacher would have noticed, and I know some of the artwork that kids do is very dark. And if you go back and you look at kids' artwork, ask questions. If you're drawing people with daggers or with hoods or with babies in precarious situations, that's a breakthrough where they're crying out for help. Because a child's body cannot absorb all of it and not break through somewhere and in some way. And those are some areas like anger outbursts. And, I know a lot of things can come out in anger, but there will be anger outbursts that they have, especially with the boys, that will come through.
It makes sense because these children, even though they're dissociating, like you were saying, and because the pain's so great, it's being locked away in a part of their minds that they don't have access to, for example, like when they're going to school and they have to do these things, so that memory isn't coming up all the time. But if they're having this horrific anger and abuse unleashed on them, every night, every week, it has to play out somewhere. So I've definitely seen that in listening to survivor stories. And I could even say in my own childhood, like what I've pieced together is when I was going through the absolute worst of it, it would come out with me getting into fights at school because I was a little tomboy. And that's totally out of character for me. Do you know what I mean? Like to be having like punch-ons with boys at school. But obviously that anger that I absorbed from somewhere else had to come out somewhere. And I imagine there'd be so many children that just get labeled as dysfunctional, attention deficit disorder, autistic, as a bully, without us stopping and considering, what is that child going through to be in that position. So it's so important that we're having these conversations. And we know how infiltrated the places or all our systems are, from the police that you report to, schools are a big part of obviously the finding and identifying of children, but also even the programming. And there's abuse. I've heard so many survivors tell me about abuse within their schools and also being trafficked out to other places. And then, the churches, and that's so very sad because people are going to church to find this connection to God, to find love, to find a better way. And unfortunately, often at the very top of those places, the people are not in worship to God as well, and they're being completely deceived. And I would say out of all the survivors I speak to, over half, and I'm probably even underestimating that, have had at least an experience of being abused by someone associated with the church. Many have had abuse or even ritual abuse within a church itself or by church people. And for a lot of people, that's really shocking. And, we can even look at the church having so much pedophilia, which, it's not ritual abuse, but it's heading that way. Why has the church had so much of this for so long? And it's actually been very much encouraged in Australia that it's only been priests that have abused children, and obviously they never get charged for it because they're protected. They get the promotions, they get moved around, that become the most powerful priests. And I love what you teach, Lisa, is because as a survivor, I was very angry at the church, and I had no idea until I've had my memories back over the last 9 months that I was abused in a church scenario. I had rituals done within a church. I was trafficked within a church community, and I found it really hard. I threw out Jesus, firstly the church, but I associated Jesus and God with that, so I threw it all out when I was 10 years old, and I saw altar boys being abused around me in primary school, and it obviously triggered my early abuse. And it's been such a long journey for me to come back to God, to come back to trusting Jesus. And I see so many survivors working through that at the moment. And, it's never to push a belief or anything on anyone. But I would love for you to cover a bit about how you processed, we sort of all go through this stage, like, why would a God allow this to happen? Why is it this way? And, Satan and the enemy is very much, pushing a lot of these beliefs on us, and we get very caught up in, is Jesus someone to be trusted? Is God good, when this world is in such a damn mess at the moment? And it certainly is. So yeah, I would love you to speak a little bit on that for so many survivors that are, on that journey of coming back to God and the heart as well.
Well, I'm just very impressed by survivors that they're on that journey at all, because the level of abuse where they are in the rituals making it sound like God is part of it. False Jesus going around raping the kids or putting kids on the cross, the emblems of the Bible and the blood and all the stuff that they're doing, and mixing the Christianity in with it is very confusing to a child. And so for a survivor to be working through that, I think is heroic, and all survivors need to be applauded for that. And I just want to say, good job. Mm-hmm. That's just amazing, because that is not God at all. What they are presenting is not God, and it is not of God. When we had the Garden of Eden, God had his total will there. There was no evil. Everything was provided for. There was access to God where we could walk in the garden with him every day. We could ask him anything and he would answer it and talk to us, and love, and God's character was there to see and to understand, and it was wonderful. And the only rule was, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Just don't eat it. And he knew that the devil was going to be sly and cunning, and that's why he made the one rule easy: don't eat it. Just don't eat it. So the devil came in, he tricked them, and they ate it. And that opened up the knowledge of good and evil and brought evil into the world. And that puts us in rituals. That led us to rituals. And then in those rituals that the devil brought to us, he sits and says, well, see, God wanted you to have this. That's why you're here. He would have stopped it, right? That's the whole idea that he presents to us, which sounds right, because when the devil talks, it always kind of sounds right, but it's kind of, we're not sure, because there's usually something wrong in there, but sometimes we kind of can't identify it. So the part that's wrong is that we're there because the devil put us there. We're there because our parents, who God gave us to protect, or our grandparents, or whoever it was that chose to put us there, were the people that were supposed to be protecting us, and they did not. They chose to go evil and to use us for their good. So we had to suffer to help them. Now, God helped us to get through it by dissociation and all sorts of stuff. And we made it through. Now, a lot of kids didn't. A lot of kids died in it, and they're in heaven with God. There's a lot of discussions. There's a lot of things in all of that. But we're here today. So then the thing is, well, some people say, well, God wanted that for you. I don't believe that ever. So what I do is I take us to the character of God. God is faithful. He's righteous. He's loving. He's merciful. He's compassionate. He's kind. He wants the best things for us. He wants good things for us. If you read Deuteronomy 28, 1-14, it talks about the blessings. You'll be blessed going in, you'll be blessed going out. Blessed will be your basket and your store. And that means the money that you need for today, and that you'll have money saved up. He'll bless the fruit of your body, your children, and he'll bless the fruit of your cattle. And God wants us to be blessed. He wants us to be provided for. He wants us to be taken care of. And so but the enemy comes in to kill, steal, and destroy. And that's all the ritual is: killing, stealing, and destroying, like at its maximum. I mean, you cannot do more than that. Short of taking your life, you cannot have more than that. So it was not God's intention for us. That was the devil's intention for us. So God, some people say, well, but God didn't stop it. I think if it was that easy, God would stop it. You know, I don't think it's all that easy, because like, could he have stopped Hitler? I mean, like, we see all this bad stuff going on all over the place. And if God was just going to zap everybody with lightning bolts, you know, I don't think there'd be many people left.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So, you know, he set things up the way it's set up. You know, I don't know why it was set up the way it was, but it was. And until it all plays out, we're all in the midst of it.
Sure.
But he wants to bring us healing and deliverance in it. And some of the scriptures that comes to me is that he collects our tears in a bottle. Has he not written about them in his book? That there's a book of Gabbi where he collects every tear that you shed in a bottle because they're that precious to him. And he's writing about them. Oh, she had a flashback today. Oh, you know, she had 3,000 tears, you know, and he's writing about it. And I bet he's crying right along with you, because he was there in those rituals with you, trying to get you through it. He didn't leave us alone. I had a mom whose daughter told her, because she couldn't get her daughter out because the husband was taking her. And she goes, "Don't worry, mommy, when they start hurting me, God takes me to heaven." So God is in there working to get us through, to try to work everything he can to help us. And so when we go through the flashbacks, you can bet he's like, I was there. I understand. I know what you went through. And I'm here to help get you to the other side. And I love you so much that I want to get you to life, and life more abundantly. I want to satisfy you with years. That means not, I want you to barely make it until you get to heaven, but I want you to abundantly be blessed in this life. I want you to be at peace. I want you to go to sleep and not have nightmares and flashbacks, but to rest and wake up refreshed in the morning and have joy and be able to look out in the blue sky and go, wow, God, that's beautiful. Thank you. And to live this life that I've blessed you with. And the devil just tried to steal everything from you, but I'm going to give it back, because God has redemption for all of us. The devil tries to kill us all, you know, whether it's SRA, whether it's sexual abuse, or whatever we go through. I've never heard of someone say, oh, my life has been so easy. I've never had a problem with anything. You know, I'd love to hear if anybody has that, reach out to me, please. I want to interview you. You know, I've never heard it. Everybody has to heal from stuff, because we live in this world and there's so much evil in this world. And God in his love and mercy understands it. And he's tender hearted. He's not hard hearted. He's not up there, get over it. Because I healed, like, it was hard healing for 20 years because there wasn't stuff out there to help.
Yeah.
So it was long. And he wasn't ever saying, Lisa, would you just get over it and be okay? I was saying that to myself. Lisa, what's the matter with you? You know, Lisa, if you were a stronger Christian, you would be over it by now. I mean, I was horrible to myself, but God never was. He was so compassionate. You know, it's like, God, here I am again. And he's like, Lisa, it's okay. We will get through this too.
Amazing.
It's like, cool, because he loves us. And then I found in Zephaniah 3:17 that he rejoices over me with singing.
Wow.
And it just touched my heart, because I just thought he was mad at me, because my dad was always mad at me.
Yeah.
I was always in trouble. No matter how hard I tried to do right, I was always in trouble. And so I just figured I was going to barely make it to heaven, and then God was going to just tell me everything I did wrong. And then I found that, I'm like, he rejoices over me? I'm okay.
Yeah.
That means I'm good enough, and it's not that I'm good enough, but that interchange that when true Lord Jesus laid down his life, he laid down all of my shortcomings. And that when he rose again victorious, I became victorious with him. And that's the resurrection power. So when God looks at me, he's like, Lisa, you're good. Everything's fine. I'm proud of you. And then you get into that Hebrews 11 hall of faith where we have so great a cloud of witnesses that are cheering us on, going, Gabbi, you've got this. I'm so proud of you. And everyone's cheering, going, yay, good job. Keep going, run the race. You've got this. And that's our Father God. That's our Daddy God. And that's the one that we can trust. And when we get to the point where we can trust him, then the healing starts coming in. That's where the healing is. And it's beautiful. It's really a beautiful place to be.
That's just such a beautiful summary, Lisa. And yeah, I think that was the biggest realization for me. And I know speaking to other survivors is you go through these horrific abuses that no child should ever go through. And the feeling is, as you're uncovering them, that we were so alone, that we weren't protected. Why did people do this to us? And then looking back now, after processing it somewhat, you see that it is actually a miracle that we are all here. We were held, through the absolute worst that, human free will was capable of, along with a whole lot of other demonics and this kind of thing, in these horrific rituals. And yet we were guided, to survive, to be able to live through that, to dissociate for however long it took us to get to the point where we are at now, where we have God, we have open hearts, and we can actually begin healing. And I think it's so beautiful what you went through, just reminding us all that, even if we had a father that was an abuser or other males in our lifetime that were, because I think so often that gets tied in with what God really is. God is none of that. God is the father that a lot of survivors have never had, and is just waiting for you to sort of open up that line of communication so you can come home and begin to heal. I would love for you, you had an incredible journey of 20 years from when your memories first come through, of trying to find help and trying to, work out what was going on, even because there was so little support and knowledge of, what ritual abuse is. I would love for you, Lisa, to share some of, your journey of healing and what you found helped, like tips for survivors, because I see survivors now, because we have these stories, number one, out there. So we realize that we're not alone. And I know when I listen to other survivors, I'm like, wow, it's not the same, but it's definitely in parallel to an experience that I've had. And that's very healing, just even having that. So I love, these podcasts and survivors sharing, because that's helping us all so much. But yeah, I would love to hear, what you found and tips and guidance for, the many survivors that are just waking up at the moment, because I don't think it needs to take decades anymore. Like with us all working together as a community, we can go fast and learn from each other and support each other as well.
Which is exciting.
Yes.
It is so exciting. People go fast. I love it. I think go through the validation, you need to prove it to yourself that you're right, and to learn to listen to the knowledge that comes up, because you have the dissociated parts inside of you, because we dissociate during the abuse, because that's the only way we can to make it. And dissociation means that we ourselves are creating little people inside of us. This isn't happening to me. This is happening to another person. And we create these little people, and they're not the creation of the group. They're forcing us to do this, but we're creating them. And each one of these people, these parts inside of us, hold information that we're not privy to in our core. So who the core Lisa is who I am now. So like this is my dad and my mom knows was information that came from one of my parts. So I never experienced that before. And it took a while before I had a flashback where my mom walked in one night in the middle of him on top of me. And I'm like, that was true.
Yeah.
That was true material. I don't know how I knew that, but and it was a lot of months later before that came out. It's like, wow. So learn to listen, because at first you won't. If you're like, you just throw it off. That makes no sense. You just throw it out. But learn to listen to that, and start engaging with your parts. You feel really stupid and you feel really crazy. And I don't do it out loud. I just do it inside my head. Just for me, I do it like a mom. Oh, hi, honey. Who are you? How old are you? I want you to know you're safe. I'm going to take care of you. Everything's all right. And you just start calming them down, because sometimes you'll feel what we call activated, where you're really scared and you're not your core self. You're these parts. So you learn to deal with the parts. And I was very angry at my parts for a very long time. You're causing me trouble. Just go away. Leave me alone. Shut up. I don't want to hear from you. Sort of stuff. But, started thinking of them as they're the heroes of my story. They're the ones that handled it for me. And once I started to have that, then they started to feel appreciated. And then we had some communication that started going on. And then I learned to bring them to either through Lord Jesus, to Holy Spirit, or to God. I created a safe space, and we would get them to God and find healing and integration. Wow. Now, another aspect is that these parts are also in the dissociation. Demons get attached to these parts, and that's part of what they do as well. So we're not possessed, but demonized. And all Christians have demonization. From what I understand, all Christians should go through deliverance. It's just part of life. If you get hurts, they have authority then that they can attach. So we want to go through and find what their legal rights are, and find healing for those parts, so we can cast those demons to the pit and just get rid of them, which is another very important modality to make sure you add in. It's a spiritual abuse. You need ministerial help to find that healing as part of what you're doing. Some people will do EMDR. I went through some of that, which is eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, where your traumatic memories are stored back here and you got to move them to your frontal lobe. And usually you do it by talking, and it takes a really long time. So if I'd have these traumatic memories, and when they first come out, I couldn't even speak them. I would start stuttering and I couldn't come up with words, and I was just a mess. And so I would get a pencil, because I couldn't use a pen because a pen was too scary. And I would write it in a journal, and I would show it with fear to my therapist, and she would read it and just kind of look at me, and we'd look at each other, because she never had an SRA, survivor before, and she didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't know what to do with it. We just look at each other and like, okay, now what do we do? It was a mess. So finally found a therapist who had EMDR skills. So by that point, I would stutter through them. And at the end of a 2-hour session, it was grueling, but at the end, I would be able to speak through it. Amazing. So for some survivors, that's helpful. Yeah. And so sometimes, but you got to make sure you get a therapist who believes in it, in SRA, and can help through that. And some will add a theophastic element to it, that God's a part of it also. We started doing that towards the end of what we were doing, and I like that way better. One thing was the way they do it now, I think it's different now, but the way we did it before was you're on this train and you're looking at the ritual as you're going by, but I always got sucked in. I couldn't.
Yeah. It's so easy to book and you're just like, okay, I'm in.
Staying on the train. I'm like, I'm on the table. You know, it's like I don't
The
I don't
train
think it
stopped.
works real well. Yeah. I want to stay on the train. Get me back on the train. Yeah. Um, there are a lot of really bad therapists out there that become abusive. And it's really hard in the beginning to stand up for yourself and get out.
Yeah.
But you have to do that. If it's if they're not being kind and compassionate, leave. It's better to have no therapist than to have a bad one because they can really damage you. And there are cult active therapists out there that are trying to silence you, trying to confuse you, or trying to make you crazy or to make you think you're crazy or to try to get you institutionalized and on drugs, and don't go for any of that.
That's
So,
such an important point, Lisa. So important
yeah,
to remember that unfortunately therapists, psychologists, even healers, so even alternative healers are part of cults. And, Fritz Springmeier wrote about this, this was decades ago, and he estimated over 50%. Now, I think in Australia, because we are just infested with Tavistock and our psychology department is so owned by them, I would actually say it's far higher than that from the reports I personally hear from survivors. Almost every survivor has been to see a therapist. And these are the ones that I hear from. So these aren't the ones that got tricked, remember, that has led them to want to commit suicide, that has reprogrammed them in some way, that has leaked their information to the cult. And they've been attacked and targeted. So, that it's so important to be really cluey about the therapist that you choose. And I love what you said, like, if you don't like it, just walk out. I mean, I was always guided, even though I had no idea of what was going on in my history until recently, just to never go to a psychologist. Just that was my guidance my whole life. And I'm so damn happy I listened to that, because if I'd went a decade ago, they would have picked up that I was potentially dissociating when I was talking about a trauma. They could have reprogrammed me and I could not be remembering at this time. So it's so important to be
or worse. Yeah,
yeah.
it's scary.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people too that have no money for therapy, or they can't find anything. And I want to encourage you also that there are a lot of survivors who have done it with just themselves and God. That when that's all there is, that God can step in there, and he is sufficient.
Yeah. And
And that,
we're the
these,
best experts too. Oh, sorry, I was just delayed. I was just going to say we are the best experts on our minds, on our experience, on our memories. So we can really empower ourselves, and we don't need a third party. You have this incredible body, mind, spirit, soul, and guidance. If you can tune into it, you can be better than any therapist if you trust yourself and work through it that way. So yeah, that was a beautiful point, Lisa. Sorry to interrupt.
that's fine. And like your podcast where where you can talk about healing, you know, there's a lot of free stuff out there. Or I've done like part work. A friend just did it with me. She helped me, setting up some of the Emmanuel method, where you bring God in, and he talks with parts, and does some negotiation with them to get them to trust him, and then he brings them out, and I'm like, oh, that's all there. We did a few sessions. I'm like, I can do this. So when I did it myself, and I helped some friends do theirs, and I'm like, yeah, you can go do that. Just God makes things easy, where man makes things very difficult.
So true.
And there's a lot of ministries out there to SRAs that are trying to make it very convoluted and very confusing, and you got to do all this stuff. And it, it might work, but I don't agree that it has to be that confusing.
Yeah.
I believe that the Bible in and of itself, and we were talking about this earlier, is sufficient to heal us of SRA in and of itself. We don't need special prayers. We don't need to understand all the demonic realm. We don't need to understand, some people are like, you have to understand all the levels of dissociation in your mind, and you got to understand which demon has the lock to the whatever stairway. And, I'm like, I reject that. I don't believe that. And, some people are like, you're just naive. It's like, well, it, I'm healing. I'm doing pretty good. And I know a lot of other people that are healing and doing pretty good without all that stuff. Now, I know other people that believe in all that stuff and they're not healing because they can't get to the demon that has the lock that they need, because they get stuck on what level and what, this demon's so much bigger than the other demons. And like what I find in the Bible, like I went through, I figured that Peter and Paul dealt with the most intense demonic activity because they were going throughout Rome. And so how did they deal with it? And they really didn't talk about it much to the churches. And when they did come across somebody who was demon possessed, they weren't finding out what demon it was or what level of authority he had, or they just cast him out. And I think that's a really important point, because a lot of people are like, you got to know what spirit it is and you got to know what level, and you got to, it's like, no. God said, resist the devil and he will flee. Well, if you're resisting the devil and he will flee, you resist the demonic and it will flee also. If you believe that you have to know the demonic and its name and what it's doing, then the demonic is going to trick you and say, well, you don't know who I am. You don't have my name right, so I don't have to leave.
Mm.
And they're going to be playing games with you. And in the courts of heaven, then they're going to have rights because you don't understand your legal authority. Where our legal authority is, as children of God, we resist the devil and he flees. We take away his rights. The cross takes away his rights. The resurrection power of Jesus takes his rights. He has to go. He has no choice. But if we're stuck with, I don't know which one it is, I got him the name wrong, then we're all confused. And if we're confused, then he's laughing and he doesn't have to go. And then God's like, you don't have the authority thing down. I can't make him go because you don't know what you're doing. So let's clear up some of that mess. We don't have to understand all that stuff. The people that are getting into all of the new age stuff, and they're getting deep into black magic, and they're getting deep into the SRA, they're learning demons and they're learning, all these levels, and they're doing all this stuff to do what they're doing. And they have to know what they're doing to do what they're doing, but we don't have to know all that to undo what they're doing, if that makes sense.
Exactly. That's such a
So
great way of putting it. And it's so empowering for survivors as well. Like often as you're healing, survivors are potentially struggling with, working a job or struggling with other health issues that are really expensive to fix. So, it's great to know that the answers are there. It's simple if we can tune in. I love that. Lisa, I would love you to run through, before we finish up, your book and where people can find you and your brilliant podcast. Lisa's been interviewing a number of survivors, and it's so great because a lot of the survivors you are interviewing are from the US as well, and just noticing all the parallels across the world in terms of how similar all of this programming and abuse has been just makes makes us realize that we're not alone, but it also makes us realize that the system is so very connected. And I love that you are speaking out and sharing all these stories for survivors, because number one, it's so healing for these people who have never been heard to be invited on to share their story. And then it's also reaching out into our collective, these stories. And I just see over the next few years just so many survivors healing enough to speak out, and they just are not going to be able to stop. just the wave that rises from that, because once there's stories coming from every town, from every city, it just becomes completely undeniable that this is just a massive infestation. So it's just so brilliant what you're doing. So yeah, please let everyone know where they can find you.
Thank you. Yeah, you too. And we'll just keep doing that. It's exposing SRA one story at a time. I mean, you can't take all the stories and see the parallels and just say, oh, everybody's talking and coming up with their stories together. There's no way, especially when you're half the world away and it's exactly the same stuff. There's no way. So my memoir is called Only God Rescued Me, My Journey from Satanic Ritual Abuse. And it's at Amazon and on Kindle. And I think Barnes and Noble online. I'm not sure if Australia will have that or not, but I know
You'll be
Amazon.
able to get Amazon. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also have You've Got the Wrong Guy. And that talks about that whole struggle with, is God at fault or is the devil at fault? And to make that line and to understand that process. So that's also available on Amazon and Kindle. My podcast, everything is under Only God Rescued Me. My journey from satanic ritual abuse, mostly because I just couldn't figure anything else out and it just seemed easier to keep it the same. So my podcast, so any podcast platform, also on YouTube and Instagram, Facebook. And for survivors that are looking for community, we have on Facebook an SRA survivor, Christian SRA survivor support group. So if you're looking for a place to go, you can go shoot a request to join there, and my team will reach out to you and get you plugged in. And we have scriptures and talking about healing from dissociation, or how to have your ventral vagal, and how some psychology sort of things to calm down. And people can put up flashbacks. What do you think? Has anybody had trouble with this? What do you do? We had someone put up the other day, is anybody else dealing with scoliosis? Do you think it has anything to do with SRA? Things like that. You can just throw stuff out there. What does anybody have on this? Or, I live here. Does anybody know if there's any ministries in this area? That sort of stuff. We have people in Australia that are in the group as well. So South Africa, Denmark, United Kingdom, we've got Canada, just around the world kind of joining in, which is nice. We had to suffer abuse alone. We don't need to heal alone. And it's like, I know for me, healing went a lot faster once I started finding community and being able to talk to other survivors and find out that what happened to me wasn't crazy, that it actually, the same stuff happened to other people. And that was just mind-blowing to me and just was very helpful. So, whatever your circumstances are, always makes you feel fragmented and alone. But I can guarantee you, no matter what your circumstances are, there's other people facing the exact same circumstances. And so we're here to help you to find those people and to not be alone and to heal faster and to get closer to God, because I find that the closer we get to God, the more deeply we can heal.
So beautiful. And I'm so proud of you as a survivor for going out in your name, no pen name. You're like, I'm Lisa Meister, putting it out there, and just teaching survivors that we don't have to be afraid anymore. They're the ones that need to be afraid if we all stand together. So we're so blessed to have you speaking out as a survivor that's healed and is being so proactive, creating solutions for everyone, Lisa. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us. And yeah, we'll definitely have you back for a chat again soon.
Well, thank you. It was such an honor to have you, Gabby. And I can't wait to have you on mine and come and tell your story. And
Sure.
I just love your listeners, and thank you for listening today.
Oh, bless you, Lisa.